Hi, my name is Morrison, and I help people with anxiety, stress and other issues to learn to cope better with them and to get on with their lives. I've got 3 things I want to help you with today. I suppose you might call them top tips. One of the things that I've noticed about clients who come to work with me is that quite often they get stuck in the what if thinking. What if X happens? What if I can't do that? What if? What if? And I don't know whether you can relate to that or not. But sometimes they get so tied up in what if, and then imagining the worst thing possible that could happen to them, that they forget or seem to be unable to think about, well, if it did happen, what would they do? So one of the things that you could perhaps do, if you find that you're stuck in the what if scenario, is to take a piece of paper, write down what it is that you're thinking the what if about. And perhaps you're also thinking if it happened it would be awful and you couldn't cope. But just imagine taking a step back, writing down that thought, that scene, and asking yourself, well, if it did happen, what would I actually do? And I'm sure you'll be able to find some solutions, some ways in which you'll be able to cope. Perhaps imagine that a friend's come to you for advice and asked you about, well, if this happened, what would I do? And you can write down the advice that you give that friend. Or perhaps imagine that someone you know or admire, a celebrity perhaps, is dealing with that same situation, and imagine how they would cope with it. You see, when we get stuck in that cycle of what if, we find that we can't often find that solution to get the result, to develop ways of coping. So by taking that step back, by pretending you're your best friend and giving yourself that advice, you'll find that you can find a solution, and that will help you to be more relaxed and calmer and to deal with things that are going on in your life. The other thing that can happen with people is that they get a sense of overwhelm. I don't know whether you've had that or not before. I know I certainly have at times in my life. It's almost as though we just can't see, in a way, I suppose, the wood for the trees. There's just so much going on that we find that we can't start to make that first step. That feeling of overwhelm can be really uncomfortable. And we can think that we just can't cope. So again, if that's a situation that you find yourself in more often than not, give yourself that time to take a step back. Break down into smaller chunks the thing that you're thinking about. You know, consciously, research has shown that we can only take in between 5 and 9 bits of information. So you can see it's quite easy for us to feel overwhelmed with things. But by taking that step back, by thinking of the little steps that we can do to get us to that task or that outcome that we want, we'll find it easier to cope. Maybe even imagining that you've achieved the result that you want, and then asking yourself, well, how did I get there? What was the last step I did? And what was the step that I did before then? And before then? Until you're back at the beginning. I think in industry it's called reverse engineering, but you can apply it to problem solving too. And the last point is about the question why. We all ask why. If you think about it, when children are little, that question why can sometimes become very irritating if you're a parent. Why does that happen, Mummy? Why does that happen, Daddy? And quite often we don't know the answer. But sometimes in life things happen, whether that's a bereavement, an accident, or an illness. And we want to know why. But sometimes we'll never know why. And that can be difficult for people to accept. I remember a few years ago, I was doing some work with the MS Society when I lived and worked in Scotland. And there was a person there, a husband, who was helping to care for his wife who had MS. And one of the things that he wanted to know was why. Why had this happened to them? Why did they deserve this? And obviously it was an answer that no one really could answer. And it might seem harsh, but I actually asked him, I said, well, if you knew why, would it actually help you to cope now? Would it help you to lead your life in a different way? And he thought about it. And he said no. He said it wouldn't really. It wouldn't change the fact that my wife's got MS. It wouldn't change that I've got to help and care for her. So if you find yourself asking why, whether it's in the middle of a row with someone saying, well, why are you doing this to me? Or what have I done to deserve this? Why? Just take that step back again and ask yourself, well, would actually knowing why help me to cope better? Most of the time, we don't need to know why. It's more about how we cope with things now and in the future that's important. What are the steps? What are the things that you can do to help yourself get out of whatever the situation is that you're in, or those repetitive thoughts that you might be having? So why isn't always a helpful question. It can also be, sometimes, a question that puts people on the spot. You know, if you think about it, if you ask the question, well, why did you do that? People immediately get on the defensive. So if you change that question, if you ask a what question or a how question or a where or a when question, that would be much more helpful and perhaps change the results that you get, not only for yourself, but when communicating with other people.